hardworking people like my parents and us as a family growing up in this great country, and opportunities and resources that are available to us as Americans that we sometimes are not aware of and sometimes don't have access to. And one of those areas that we are very, very passionate about is conservation, and specifically land and water conservation. And we work hard to cultivate the passion of young people for their outdoors and build advocates to really champion the protection of land and water. I am so grateful to be here with you. I'm so grateful that Congressman Grijalva is here with us today with his wonderful staff, and also Congressman Gallegos and Congresswoman Chu. We are also expecting Congressman Butterfield. And thank you for generously taking time to join us today. We're thrilled to have you. And for these members of Congress, for me, for my family, for all of you, for all of us, the issue of inclusivity is personal. I have visited many of our national parks, and I have visited our monuments, our forests, our BLM conservation lands, both on vacation with my husband and my two sons, but also as an advocate. And my team, Jill Wheeler is our chief of programs, and I have a wonderful team that has worked for years. So we're going to abbreviate this a little bit from 3 minutes to 30 seconds. So I am really pleased to introduce to you to Congressman Grijalva, and a leader who has been a champion for the Latino community, but also for the protection of public lands from Arizona to nationwide here in Washington, D.C. for many, many years. And he's a role model for all of us, and we're so thrilled to have him here today.
Mother Nature brings us indoor, and Pavlov's dog calls us down. What we need to do, it's a process here. Real quick, Centennial this year for the National Park Service and for our public lands, and celebration of our legacy of conservation, and it's also a time to honor the diverse culture and histories of these communities that make up this wonderful country of ours. And but unfortunately, many families don't have access to the parks. They don't visit the parks, and some don't feel welcome. They don't see their culture, their history reflected and presented in their public parks and in their public lands. And we need to bring those lands, those parks, all our public lands, to the American people, and to engage all Americans in the conservation, promotion, and enhancement of our public lands, but in doing so, also make it more reflective and welcoming for all communities. I support this new coalition's effort to ensure that our parks and public lands are welcoming to Americans. It's a way to protect our history, both in the conservation and as a history of a nation, and to ensure that our public lands will be there in the future. And one of the ways they'll be there in the future is to build a constituency that is going to continue to protect, enhance these public lands for generations and generations to come. We need to leverage the Centennial into something beyond the celebration it justifiably should be. We need to leverage it into the next 100 years being a legacy of inclusion, diversity, and a representative of the mosaic that makes this country great. That's our goal. That's the coalition's goal. And another 35 minutes, by the way, but brevity demands of me to introduce my good friend from Arizona, Ruben Gallego, son of immigrants to this country of ours, military veteran, before Congress, a community leader, an activist in Arizona, from Arizona's 7th District. He's a member of the Natural Resources Committee, and we're very fortunate to have him as part of that. And he's on the Federal Land Subcommittee and the Oversight Committee as well. Good, bright, important addition to this Congress. It's going to add a lot to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Grijalva. He's my tag team green brother from Arizona, which is very helpful when it comes to the Natural Resources Committee. I am under the same constraints as my colleague over there. Needless to say, the parks and our systems and our public lands are for everyone. And, especially in Arizona, where more than 60% of our land is actually owned by the government. And to think a lot of people in my community, a lot of young men of color, a lot of women of color will never touch foot in one of the public lands in Arizona, though there are merely 20 to 30 minutes away from some of the most beautiful places in the world. We need to take this Centennial and make it an opportunity to encourage these young men and women, these families, to see what they pay for, because this is their land also, and what we're trying to give them as an inheritance to their kids and their future generations. So I'm really excited about the coalition, to see so many friends get together for such an important issue that sometimes has largely been ignored when it comes to our minority communities. Really excites me and tells me that we can really do a lot of good work together. So thank you for joining together, and thank you for everyone supporting us. And it's my pleasure to introduce my leaders, Judy from California.
Well, I really have to abbreviate it and run down to vote, but nonetheless, let me say, this is so important to me. Los Angeles is one of the most park-poor regions of the country, so I really feel it. And despite our proximity to the gorgeous San Gabriel Mountains, just 15% of the population has pedestrian access to green spaces. And there's a racial divide. In LA, the white neighborhoods enjoy 32 acres of park space per 1,000 people. But for African American neighborhoods, it's 1.7 acres per 1,000 people. And how about Latino neighborhoods? It's 0.6%. Wow. For every 1,000 people. And so that's why I pushed so hard to get President Obama to declare the San Gabriel Mountains a national monument. And he did. Yeah. It was incredible. And I've already seen the difference. I've seen the hiring of people. I've seen $4.5 million come in from the federal government, and then $4 million from philanthropic funds. The hiring of volunteer coordinators, trash pickup, a dramatic improvement already, which makes this a great place, an even greater place for all the people from all the different neighborhoods of Southern California to come. And besides that, I do want to also make a plug for the fact that these public lands connect us with history. Like, for instance, where Japanese Americans were interned in the camps. They tell the story of our multicultural nation. So that's why I support the Centennial Initiative so much. I'm so glad to see this incredible coalition. Let's make sure we increase access to public spaces. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. So, no, I am not Congressman D.K. Butterfield. However, I am the policy director for the Congressional Black Caucus, and he apologizes he is not able to come over. They did call the vote, so he apologizes. And so I'm just going to read a few remarks that he had prepared for the event, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Finney. Oh, yes. So, of course, we want to thank everyone who is assembled here for ensuring that the critical steps are taken towards an inclusive system of national parks and public lands. This year, as you know, marks the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service, and the service has played a critical role in our nation in ensuring open space and the historic preservation of the places that comprise the history, fabric, and the creation of our nation. So we must ensure that we continue efforts to preserve and protect these places that tell the story of our nation. Members of the CBC stand united with our colleagues in Congress to continually conserve our nation's sacred grounds. These lands have left an imprint upon
upon the conscience of our society and have contributed to the culture of our nation. We are excited that Centennial events will occur throughout the year, and we already know they are happening within CBC member districts across the country, and we are looking forward to it. So it's my honor, on behalf of Congressman Butterfield, to introduce Dr. Carolyn Finney. She is a writer, a performer, and a cultural geographer. As a professor of geography at the University of Kentucky, she is deeply interested in issues relative to identity, difference, creativity, and resilience. She serves on the U.S. National Parks Advisory Board that is working to assist the National Park Service in engaging in relations of reciprocity with diverse communities. So at this time, no problem, Dr. Finney.
Hi, this is fantastic. This is like the moment. I just want to freeze it all, close the doors. No, I don't want that to happen because I actually want us to move forward. So they just asked me to talk a little bit about why this is important, and I have about 1,000 different things I could say about this, which I won't. A couple of things I want to say is, in 4 years, over 50.2% of this country is going to be people of color. We are no longer the minority, so even using that term anymore doesn't make any sense. We're having conversations in this country about environmental change, broadly defined, and what that looks like. All over this country, we're talking about race and diversity. I've been on so many college campuses and other spaces where we're having this conversation. Why wouldn't we be having this conversation when we're talking about public lands? And we may not all be able to agree about what we have in common, but we all need this land to survive. So we have to figure out how to work together. And one of the things that really excites me about this opportunity this year, because I think we always have these opportunities, but this is a big one right now this year at the Centennial, is that we can figure out how to do that. Why can't the public lands be a space that we can also work some of our differences out? And I don't mean this to be corny, but I mean to be real. People need a job. People want to feel like they belong. This is we the people now. This isn't who we the people of 400 years ago. We look really different, and we owe it to ourselves, right, to work this out. I also, people ask me personally why I care about this. Yeah, I write about it and do research, but really that's not why I'm motivated at all. I'm Black. I live here in this country. I'm an American citizen. I've watched my parents with no education care for somebody else's land for 50 years with no recognition about that. I got to learn about nature and be in the outdoors. I got to go to school. I got to eat because of the hard work that they've done, and they're not included. When people talk about the environment, people don't think about them. People don't think about them paying their taxes. People don't think about the way that they love that land. And when I think about the history of this country, we have so many people that I feel that are invisible in that conversation. But that doesn't mean they don't care, and it doesn't mean that they're not there. And so for me, that this is really a moment for us to grab this. I feel really strongly about it because I want to be included. I want my parents to be included. I want everybody to be included because the story is evolving about who we are. And this is our moment right now. So let's make it happen.
Wow. Yeah.
Thank
you. We feel motivated.
Yeah.
Next, I'd like to introduce Mark Masaoka. And he's also, in addition to Dr. Finney and many other leaders involved in this effort, over 30 organizations and even student leaders helped shape this vision and policy document. And Mark is a policy director at Los Angeles-based Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council. And we're so thrilled to have him here today.
So here today, as a coalition representing diverse communities, here on the Centennial of the establishment of the National Park Service, we are calling upon President Obama to issue a memorandum that directs the Department of Agriculture, the Interior, and other federal agencies to adopt principles and practices that reflect a more inclusive approach to the conservation of our public lands. Ones that reflect the faces of our country, one that respects our respective histories, cultures, and approaches, and one that engages all of our country's peoples. Now we've heard visionary statements at times and speeches over the years, but oftentimes it doesn't get outside of Washington. And being from Los Angeles, it takes a long time for these things to percolate. And so one of our goals is to create a structure and concrete measures that government departments can implement that will have a quick effect and effective impact. So concretely, we're talking about the President authorizing an action committee of ombudsmen, which will oversee the multi-agency implementation process. And we've identified sort of 5 areas in which the work could take place. The first is, as Congressman Grijalva mentioned, is the importance of access to public lands, and specifically the barriers to access. And we're talking about both geographic proximity, we're talking about the cost of sometimes getting to and entering these lands, and also cultural barriers in which people don't feel welcome in these spaces. And so some of the things that we are suggesting is to, one, create a senior level position in the White House at CEQA that will help oversee implementation of this from the White House. Secondly, we see the importance of reflecting the diverse cultures of our country. And it's not only a matter of, I think, having things being done in language or pictures of our faces, but also recognizing the actual accomplishments about people from these various constituencies that we've talked about. And not just race and ethnicity, but also veterans, different faiths, disabled persons, sexual orientation, and a lot of people from these various backgrounds have played a role in conservation. So, for example, a Chinese-American cook was with the U.S. Geological Survey, and in 1899, the survey named a mountain after him in Yosemite. And he was also the person who accompanied the group called the Mather Mountain Group, which included the Vice President of Southern Pacific, U.S. members of Congress, the head of President of the U.S. Geological Survey, who toured Yosemite and other spaces, and later went on to found the National Park Service. So those roles are there, and in Los Angeles, we have an annual pilgrimage to Mount Sing to recognize our participation in that process. And there are numerous other examples which are not really told enough in the public dialogue. But other specific things we're seeking are resources. Full funding for the Historic Preservation Fund, the National Heritage Areas programs, and some of the specific programs for American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians. In terms of landscape conservation, we want to see a commitment for the identification and designation of new areas and sites and monuments that can serve and protect our public lands, which sometimes are being challenged by commercial and development interests, as well as the diverse historical and cultural populations that we have. And we're not talking about entirely new ideas. There are things like the Student Conservation Corps, which we would like to see revived and reinvigorated. Our report also mentions the importance of stakeholder engagement, and we'd like to see the President launch a new initiative, which could involve having a partner, an independent partner, such as a university, that could identify strategies and processes which could engage and include the diverse communities that we're representing. Also, the diverse workforce, and I think that's important, and of course it involves outreach to our respective communities, but it also involves, I think, encouraging members of our communities to get education and not only in like become forest rangers, which we think of. In fact, when I was in high school, I think half the class came out after an aptitude test and was told, you would be a good forest ranger. So it means really sort of understanding that the different disciplines, water conservation, soil, trees and botany, and those are the kind of skills that the Forest Service, when we work with in Los Angeles, those are the kind of actual jobs that people are being hired in. And these are some of the same people who are very effective spokespersons in doing community engagement, and people can see from their authoritative voices why the environment is important to protect. And so I think these recommendations, I think, will go a long way to making this very concrete, and also our goal in terms of developing and training a new generation of advocates and stewards who can care for our public lands. Thank you.
So as you see, our president has shown great leadership in this area in protecting public lands. And we're hoping that he will answer the call that we have brought forward. And this will go on to our new president as well, because this is a long-term commitment that we need and we're asking for now. And we thank you very much.
We have some members of the media. Would you like to turn it over to questions if there are any?
Yeah, can you go more in depth into how different cultures may not necessarily feel welcomed in what we have now?
Yes. It's a large question. If you think about the history of this country, let's just call some things out. Slavery, Japanese internment, the way the Chinese who helped to build the railroad aren't recognized for doing it, removal of American Indians from their native lands. Now, we could go down the line about the different ways within which groups of people have been treated. And a lot of that behavior, I believe, resonates in today's practices. It pops up in different ways, whether we're talking about memory, story, the feelings by which one group may come to a national park and feel unsafe to be in the woods, because if you think about what the woods meant for African Americans back during Jim Crow segregation, you might be afraid to be in that space alone. Doesn't mean you don't love the woods, doesn't mean you don't have a grandfather who hunted in the woods, but it means that you understand, or you believe you understand, that living in this country as a black person during that time might be your death if you were in that space. Just because you were in the woods or outdoors doesn't change that. So that's just one group and one example of the ways within which I think having some understanding of who we are in this country and how we're founded, the good, bad, and the ugly of that, which is still very real. For me, it's not unconnected to Black Lives Matter. It's not unconnected to unequal pay for women. It's not unconnected to any of these issues. All we got to do is look at our history. So I feel like I understand perfectly why some groups of people may feel unwelcome. The agencies, and I want to be really careful about this because I think there are a lot of good people who work in the Federal Land Agency. I know some of these people. I had the privilege and opportunity to work with them. And let me also be clear about, they were formed in this country. They were formed in this country at different times. They built traditions and had mission statements based on the perceptions of their own privilege, which didn't necessarily include all that racial and ethnic difference in the room at the time, right? So I'm being as kind and as gentle as I can about saying what I see to be true, right? And so, if there's something you don't know, you don't always know what you don't know. So you're sitting here making up a rule and assuming that everybody's going to feel comfortable to come to the woods and go on a hike, but everyone's not going to feel comfortable. Everybody hasn't always been welcome to do that. They don't know, maybe they're not interested in doing that, maybe that's not how they like to come to the woods. There's all these kinds of questions that for me only get answered by building those relationships, making spaces for those other people to be in the room, and being willing to change. I tell people, it's not about just having people to the table. We might just need to change the table. And that's going to take all of us actually to do that, because I believe we have everything we need. We do not have to go anywhere. We just have to be willing to work with what we have and open up those doors.
I'd like to add that many of our communities don't see ourselves in the parks, and therefore we don't feel it's for us. So that's what we've heard from many families, and it's very important, just as Dr. Finney said, we have the opportunity, we have the human resources in this nation that are just incredible. Young people, older people, people with different skills. It's just a matter of coming together, making sure that we bridge, by coming together, collaborating, we really bridge and facilitate that process to support diversifying the staff at all levels of employment in all public land areas and the national parks. It's very important because that's going to be also a very important driver to attracting communities and making them feel welcome.
Anybody else?
Well, there's no more. Have you had any, pushback on this that you've kind of experienced? An idea of different things.
Yes. And I'm sorry, but because I'm just going to say it, in this country there's always been pushback about diversity. It doesn't matter what space, we're seeing it all the time, and you've been watching the news lately. It's everywhere. Why wouldn't we be feeling that in the issue of public lands? For me, it's never separate. Even though if we look at 1964, as my good friend Frank Peterman reminded me, is that we had the Wilderness Act and the Civil Rights Act in the same year, but these two groups were not talking to each other. You know, and for me, it's a real example that illustrates that resistance. I know it was something I didn't know right away either. You know, I knew about those two things. I didn't understand that, but it tells us a lot about who we are. So yes, there's pushback. People, you know, look, sometimes people are just scared of change. You know, while I try to be empathetic to a room full of people that don't look like me and know that when I come in that room that I can seem threatening to them because they don't know me and I'm going to start talking differently about something. I have different ways of thinking about it, and suddenly people start to feel like what they've become really comfortable with, this beautiful table here, is going to look different from them, which means they have to learn some new skills. Maybe they'll become irrelevant. And I understand how because I sometimes feel irrelevant too. That's a scary place to be. And that can't stop us from moving forward because this world looks different and we still have some of the same old problems we've had for the last 400 years. And this is an opportunity for us to do different. So yeah, there's pushback, but pushback shouldn't stop us becoming who we can be.
Change is difficult, and for our federal government, change is really difficult. And I think that there's going to be a need, and what we're calling for is drastic, very scary change. And one example I can give you is with the Latino community, and especially along the border cities, but even nationwide, just the simple color of the uniforms that rangers wear. And I've worked with rangers, I've worked with park staff, and they're such passionate, wonderful people who love to share their knowledge of science, their knowledge of these beautiful places with everyone who's interested in listening. And it makes the whole park experience so much better. And it's such a shame that something as simple as the uniform and what its similarity to the Border Patrol's uniform and the coloring and could be very frightening for certain segments of the Latino population. And so a discussion about that's going to be really tough. I think the Park Service might say, whoa, hold on a minute. You know, this is something we've been proud of for a long time. And so it's just a matter of discussing and understanding and bringing it to the table and really looking at some important change that can be big, bold, and scary, but very necessary if we're serious about the next 100 years, really truly having our public lands represent who we are in America.
Anything else? Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.